It's a human.
What did you think I was?
Nothing. Ghost.
What is this? Hi, my name is Sydney, welcome back to hell. And as per usual, before we launch in, today's video is sponsored by Raycon. And of course, by my company, Lions Tea Exchange. I've only got a few boxes left of the peppermint white chocolate, so if you'd like to give the 2 remaining winter flavors a go, they're still hanging on, they're still around. But like I mentioned before, I'm starting to work on my new spring blends at the moment, so I will be asking everyone for their feedback on flavors very soon. But in the meantime, grab yourself a box of my signature line. The tea is great to sip on in this wintry weather, and I've got some cool bits and pieces coming down the pipeline for all of you. I will link everything in the description box as per usual. Now, full disclosure everybody, I am currently battling a major head cold at the moment, and today I actually feel the worst of all of the days. So to be perfectly honest with all of you, I don't particularly feel like being on camera, so the majority of this video will not have my face in it. So if you're new here, and this is the first video of mine that you've ever watched, just know that I am usually on screen a lot more, and normally I'm a lot funnier. I don't feel particularly funny right now. So yes, I really don't feel all that great right now, but I wanted to get a video made, and again, for those of you who are new, I'm usually a lot better at this YouTube thing. Also, big thank you to my friend Brandon Morse, who writes for Red State and also has his own YouTube channel, because he helped a lot with me making this video, so go and check him out. I will link him in the description box. He also made a video about Snow White as well that I think you should all go and watch, so go do that, go show him some love, because I'm not sure that I could have gotten this done if it weren't for him. Get you some friends that take pity on you in your weakened state. It's quite useful. Anyway, now that Disney's Snow White remake is only a couple months away, the company has started blessing us with more and more trailers showing us what we can expect from the film. And as you guys know at this point, because I've talked about it a lot in other videos, I am not going into this with high expectations. At all. And frankly, I'm not sure that anyone else is either. At this point, as most of you know, Disney has been fighting an uphill battle with this movie since day one. From the massive backlash towards the casting of Rachel Zegler as Snow White, to their decision to include 7 magical people instead of the 7 dwarves, to them then backtracking and replacing the magical people with horrific CGI abominations of the dwarves when they could have just cast little people in the first place. And lately, and I personally love this one, we've found out that Snow White's name is because she was born in the snow, not because of her skin color. I hate it here. But as the film's release date draws closer and closer, I wanted to weigh in on why I believe that this movie will be yet another catastrophic failure for the company. And I think it's important to highlight why this is extra sad, given that the 1937 Snow White, the original Snow White, is really the animation, the full-length animation, that put Disney on the map in this capacity. Snow White and the 7 Dwarves was the flagship animation for the Disney of old, and it's kind of crazy to see what the Disney of now is doing to it. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the incoming catastrophic failure that is going to be the 2025 Snow White film. And in addition to all of my regular disclaimers, like this video not being exhaustive and whatnot, just know that I probably have missed things on account of having a sick brain. Not sick as in deranged, sick as in mucus. Listen, that's an important qualifier in 2025. Leave me alone. But as per usual, before you once again board my hell gondola and together we traverse this lake of disappointment and tears and why are they doing this, let's hear from today's sponsor, Raycon. Hey you, I bet you have ears and like listening to things. Like murder podcasts for the ladies and Roman Empire podcasts for the lads. I actually have no idea what you guys like listening to. I'm sorry. But what if I told you that wireless calls and music appreciation and general listening was about to get a whole lot more affordable with better quality? Well, it is!
Thanks to Raycon.
Raycon everyday earbuds are great for all your listening needs because they offer premium audio no matter what you're doing. And their latest model is now better than ever, with a 32-hour battery life, active noise cancellation, and it even lets you pair with 2 devices at once, which is really helpful if you don't want to have to keep unlinking and then relinking things. And lucky for us, while being packed with features, Raycon starts at just half the price of other premium audio brands. I've actually only ever owned really cheap earbuds, so using Raycon has been insane for me. The sound quality is so much better, they actually fit into my tiny baby ears, and I love that I can charge them for 10 minutes and get 90 minutes of battery. And 2 things I really love are their cute protective case covers and the fact that Raycon offers a 30-day happiness guarantee, no questions asked. So if you too are ready for a great pair of new earbuds, then click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/SydneyWatson for 15% off site-wide. Yes, that is right, 15% off everything on Raycon's website when you go to buyraycon.com/SydneyWatson. Now, I actually made a video a little while ago discussing the insufferableness of modern Disney princesses, and in that video, I talked about the historical context surrounding the 1937 Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs film. And although I am always hesitant to go over old ground, I do think it's really important to reiterate some of those points so that you too can understand the context in which this film was made. Firstly, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which debuted in 1937, came at the tail end of the Great Depression, a period marked by severe economic hardship and widespread poverty following the 1929 stock market crash. During this time, the role of women in society was evolving. As men were laid off in the thousands, women began to enter the workforce in greater numbers, often taking up jobs in laundries, hospitals, canneries, and so on. The general sense at the time was one of gloominess, except for Hollywood. Believe it or not, the film industry experienced tremendous success during the 1930s because it was able to give weary, impoverished audiences exactly what they craved: escapism. While other industries were faced with severe challenges at the time, American cinema achieved unprecedented levels of cultural impact, and this was due in part to studios prioritizing comedies, musicals, and storylines that celebrated triumph in the face of adversity. When Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs finally made its debut, it was perfectly poised to provide more of this message. On the surface, it was a story that showed a young woman not only succeeding, but overcoming the evils around her. This was an inspiring message for 1930s America. I've seen other people mention that some of its success was due to the secondary characters, like the dwarves and the evil queen, who played their own very important roles for audiences. And this is something to broadly note about Disney in its golden era. It allowed for secondary characters to play pivotal and important roles, but more on that later. As I mentioned in my last video, where I went into the history of 1937 Snow White herself has been viewed as embodying the spirit of 1930s American women, reflecting not just the era's aesthetic, but its resilience. To once again quote art historian Carmenita Higginbotham, Snow White, while not a revolutionary figure, still demonstrates a spirited character who leverages her skills and traits. Her story, rather than endorsing a domestic role for women, might be better interpreted as an ode to simpler, less troubled times. After all, if you are in fact a woman in 1930s America, just struggling to get by, why wouldn't you want a prince to come along and sweep you off your feet? And if you're a 1930s man without a job, struggling to feed his family and having to send his wife off to the canneries, wouldn't you want to be the man doing the sweeping? I think that we can confidently say that yes, you would. The second important thing to note is what 1937 Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs meant to Walt Disney himself. During the 1930s, full-length animated films were virtually non-existent. Animations were only a few minutes in length and often played in theaters before the feature production. These animations, for Walt Disney Productions, were supremely popular, but Walt wanted to expand. For some time, he'd already been considering doing a feature-length animation, but finally settled on the Brothers Grimm fairy tale, Sneewittchen, I think that's how that's pronounced. I'm not sure. Anyway, it means Snow White, and that became the basis for his film. Years earlier, he had been inspired by a 1916 hour-long silent film about the same story. It seems that once his mind was made up, there was no shifting him from this idea. Walt Disney knew that his film would be an important project, despite those around him arguing otherwise. The project was viewed with such skepticism and negativity, it was even nicknamed Disney's Folly, as other Hollywood folk expected it to be a catastrophic failure. Nope, they were about 100 years too early for that judgment. Walt Disney was undeterred. In an effort to get his team on board, he reportedly spent 4 hours acting out the entire Snow White story.
50 cents a piece, which was a lot of money, the equivalent of at least $10 now, to have a nice dinner and to come back to the studio where he related by himself the whole Snow White story. He acted all the parts, he even indicated the songs, he had the characters, everything in this Snow White picture was completely developed in his own mind.
Then, with everyone's approval, he poured years of his life, almost $1.5 million, and the future of his company into what would later become a box office success. It's important to note that Walt Disney wanted to do more than just tell a story about a girl and an evil queen. He wanted to bring the world around that girl to life. The film was made at a time when animation required detailed frame-by-frame work, with every additional element taking days or sometimes weeks to animate. Disney envisioned a film where every inch of the screen was full of life. From the foreground to the background, he ensured that frames were packed with movement. Walt Disney and his team ended up using several new techniques in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, such as larger animation cells to ensure all artistic details could be included, and using what is called multiplane camera, which gave the illusion of 3 dimensions by placing several layers of drawing, one behind the other, and moving them separately. This was a definite game changer from the side-scrolling 2D animations to which audiences had grown accustomed. Although early viewers might not have recognized the technical intricacies behind the film's magic, they still would have noticed scenes like Snow White running terrified through the forest. Here, the branches seemed to be grabbing at her, and the ominous eyes in the shadows were eventually shown to be those of benign forest creatures. The trees in this scene were not just static elements, but actively part of the storytelling. All of this to say, Walt Disney took a real chance on producing Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and it was a resounding success. And really, without her, without the prince, the dwarves, and the evil queen, Walt Disney Productions might never have taken off like it did. Like I have pointed out in other videos, Disney films were a product of the time, and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was no exception. So the question then becomes, if this film was once so well received by audiences, then why is the modernized 2025 version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs destined to fail? Well, I think that there are a few reasons for that. The 1937 Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was hugely anticipated by the public, while 2025 Snow White has been slated as a failure before it's even hit cinemas. Not to mention, it's been embroiled in controversy since day one. Disney had already primed audiences to be disappointed with its live-action remakes, especially after so many had fallen flat for so many of the same reasons. Weird CGI, and honestly guys, that's putting it pretty mildly. Inappropriate casting choices, also putting it very mildly. Terrible writing and corporate feminist narratives have been accepted as the norm in most of these films. So when a Snow White remake looked like a serious reality, viewers were already anticipating more of the same. And our first real introduction to what the film was going to be came from leaked set photos of the lead actress in costume, a woman called Rachel Zegler, whose name I also sometimes say as Ziegler, and honestly, I might just alternate between the two, and I'm not sorry about it. We also got to see images of the Seven Dwarfs, who were not really even dwarves at all, but rather an assortment of what I can best describe as mental illness personified. The bizarre thing here was that Disney's replacement of the Seven Dwarfs seemingly came about for no other reason than little person actor Peter Dinklage complaining about the use of dwarves in the film, calling it effing backwards. Or really, Peter, please, no, really, just tell us more. Needless to say, Rachel Zegler's casting and no dwarves set the tone for what was to come, and it really set people's blood on fire. On the one hand, Disney was proud to have cast a Latina actress as Snow White, while viewers were upset about the perceived race swap. After all, Snow White's name is literal and grounded in her appearance. She is originally described as a young woman with lips red as the rose, hair black as ebony, and skin white as snow. The 1937 adaptation stayed true to this description, while the 2025 remake clearly would not be following suit. Because, you know, navigating that for woke Disney would have been a minefield. You can almost hear the activists crying. You might be wondering how Disney planned to get around this annoying little fact. Well, instead of adhering to Snow White's original appearance and ethnicity, Disney cast aside the skin white as snow component and replaced it with Snow White was born in the snow. No, I'm not joking. That's where they're going with this.
To honor the day I was born, my father named me Snow White.
This stuff is so dumb. Good lord. Now, while not everyone agrees that characters should and must resemble the original source material, enough people do that this became an immediate issue. Like, no surprises there. And as an aside, while some of you might disagree with this, I think that Snow White being pale and fair-skinned is about more than appearance. The white, fair, pale thing is an allegory that ties into who she is. That's obviously a longer conversation for another day. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe the fairest in the land thing not only refers to the most beautiful, but also the most fair skin. I don't know, maybe I'm reaching there, just ignore me. Also, it's worth remembering that only a few years earlier, people learned Disney had race-swapped the red-headed Danish Little Mermaid in their upcoming live adaptation, and now we know how well that all went down. So at this point, it was very clear what the company was prioritizing, and that wasn't staying true to its own source material. But inappropriate physical casting could have been where this issue ended, had it not been for the fact that Rachel Zegler herself turned out to be an enormous public liability. In several widely circulated clips, Zegler said that she didn't like or watch the original film, called The Prince a Stalker, joked that they would cut all of his scenes from the remake, and touched on how Snow White basically don't need no man. For a lot of people, me included, it was bizarre to watch one of Disney's actresses go on basically a national press tour where she publicly attacked the company's legacy work, the very work that Walt Disney built the foundation of his empire on and put the company on the map. Of course, her comments were not well received. Are we surprised? No, not really. And instead of appealing to existing fans and potential new viewers, Zegler instead crystallized herself as a problem. Since then, she has only continued to dig her own grave, doubling down by calling those critical of her casting racist and misogynistic. She's even recently made disparaging comments about Trump supporters that she eventually had to walk back. But bear in mind that Zegler's unpleasant commentary doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's representative of where Disney is at as a company and the incoming girl bossification of the Snow White film. One of the biggest issues that I have with Disney's princess remakes is, in order to save these characters from the perceived damsel in distress trope, it inevitably forces them into an equally limiting girl boss trope. In an attempt to modernize its princesses and show them as strong, independent feminist women, Disney effectively strips them down to one-dimensional characters void of meaningful struggles, personality, and even the romance arcs that played an important role in the original animated films. And we know this is coming down the pipeline based on Zegler's description of her role in the film, making it abundantly clear that the original Snow White animation is undesirable and telling us directly that there is no love story here.
It's really not about the love story at all, which is really, really wonderful. And whether or not she finds love along the way is anybody's guess until 2024. All of Andrew's scenes could get cut, who knows?
Something that has always bothered me is how this new wave of films acts as if romance and love takes away from a female protagonist. It's like every female lead has to be cold and heartless for her to be tough. Ironically, that's the opposite of what Snow White is. It's her kindness and warmth that makes her endearing and allows her to triumph. Walt Disney and his team knew this. Modern Disney seemingly views this as an impairment. Is that the right word? Maybe disability? Cripplement? Is that a word? Cripplement? It's a cripplement? And maybe this is an explanation for why these corporate feminist princess films have a tendency to sideline secondary characters who, like I mentioned earlier, are actually central to the storyline. Because why would the girl boss princess need anyone else when she can do it all herself? In this case, it's even in the name. The original film was called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, because the dwarves are as key to the story as Snow White, maybe even more so in some cases. The new film is simply called Snow White because, as we know, it's going to be all about her. Relegating the dwarves to the sidelines is a massive disservice to the original animation and the original narrative that Walt Disney was trying to tell. To quote a great observation that someone left as a comment on one of my videos, and I'm very sorry for not naming you directly, I tried to find it and I can't, so if this was you who said this, you're very smart. A lot smarter than me. Congratulations, well done. Anyway, Snow White is treasured by these little men who see her as beautiful on the outside as she is on the inside. And it is through them that we get to know who Snow White is. They also play a key role in saving her and helping her grow. An example of her goodness is demonstrated through how she treats Grumpy, for example. To begin, he doesn't like her. He's standoffish and he's even a bit rude. Snow White sees him as a man who needs love. In the scene where she bakes a pie, Snow White made this specifically for Grumpy, as a gesture of kindness. Over time, she wins him over, softening him and changing his overall demeanor. In the end, Grumpy is the first to lead the charge back to the house to rescue Snow. He is the first one chasing after the evil witch crone lady, and upon Snow White's death, he is the only dwarf to place a bouquet of flowers on her hands. Guys, that made me a little bit emotional saying that. It's like my sick brain is giving me the feels. Oh my goodness. Snow White definitely made an impact on the grumpiest dwarf, and his life is forever changed because of her. But mark my words, absolutely none of this will make its way into this remake. And if it does, guys, I will be unbelievably surprised, because modern Disney simply doesn't leave room for this sort of nuance. And it's ironically nuance that was able to be depicted in a very short animated film from almost 90 years ago. 'Cause Walt Disney knew what was up! Similarly to the dwarves, I'm extremely bothered by the idea that the prince in Snow White will be sidelined. What's not widely known is that Walt Disney originally wanted the prince to have a much, much larger role. The trouble was, at the time, animators at the studio didn't have all that much experience drawing lifelike people. They weren't confident in their ability to do him and other humans in the film justice, so they felt it necessary instead to roll him back. I don't know why, but this just makes me envision them drawing a bunch of Cronenberg people because they don't understand human form, and for some reason that's just hilarious to me. Anyway, originally, Walt Disney planned to have the prince captured by the evil queen, and held in a dungeon, and then saved by the woodland creatures. He also hoped that the prince would play a much greater role in trying to save Snow White. Ultimately, their lack of experience with human subjects just didn't allow for this to happen, which ironically opened a huge door for modern Disney. While I'm largely of the opinion that most of these remakes are completely unnecessary, perhaps this is the one and only time where modern Disney had the chance to tell the full story that Walt Disney couldn't. They could have given this prince a voice, a personality. They could have built on the ideas that Walt already had, but instead they did the exact opposite. Because in the world of girl bosses, princes are bumbling idiots, buffoons, and simply not of any use. Anyway, all of this to say that I hope you're seeing the pattern here. Doing the opposite of what Walt Disney would do, especially within his own company, often ends in disaster. This kind of rolls me around to the last point that I want to make about this. Walt Disney understood the movie that he was making was for the times that he was in. One of the primary reasons remakes tend to suck is because you can remake the movie, but you can't remake the times. What I mean by that is that it's very challenging to take a film that was made for a specific audience during a specific period of time and remake it with the same story beats. They don't ring as true because we're effectively focusing in on the story needs of the time and not the story needs of today. Of course, there can be age-old messages that will apply no matter when a story is being told, and thankfully most Disney classics are full of these, but even I can admit that there is a time and place for modernizing a film, but it really has to be done correctly. One thing we can credit Disney of old with is its ability to create new films that met the expectations and the needs of the audience at the time. And as it progressed through the years, the company successfully hit on society's contemporary values. But back then, the changes weren't heavy-handed or advertised like they are today, meaning people were able to enjoy the company's creations without being acutely aware that they were being force-fed an agenda. Some might call this subversive, and maybe it is, but it was clearly successful. Disney's existing problem is that its attempts to modernize these films are all wrong. And the irony is that these new modern boss ladies aren't even speaking to today's audience either. Disney is making movies for its own echo chamber, effectively creating characters that speak to what the activists at the company and those in its viewership want. The funny part is, these modern girl boss movies can still get across the female empowerment message, but that requires creating characters with actual depth. Entertainment that features strong female characters isn't exactly rare. These ladies have been popping up for decades. There are even several great shows released recently, like Blue-Eyed Samurai and Shogun, that feature some of these female characters. The issue is that, in the modern era, most writers and showrunners, especially those employed by Disney, have lost the art of subtlety. When you push an agenda before a story, you get message-first storytelling, which is hardly storytelling at all. This opens the door for writing that is too often plagued with self-inserts, bizarre casting choices, and what South Park's Matt Stone and Trey Parker call "and then storytelling," where things don't happen naturally, but happen because the writer needs them to. It stops being a tale filled with characters you can relate to and plots that you're interested in, and just becomes flat-out propaganda trying badly to disguise itself as a story, like a wolf trying to disguise itself as a sheep by writing sheep on its sides. So, in essence, Disney has two problems here. For one, it's trying to package up a story meant for a different time and sell it to a world that's moved on past that era, and doing so in a way that only speaks to a small group of people who align ideologically with whatever agenda Disney's trying to push. Ultimately, for me, it is really tragic to see Disney take yet another beloved film, and not just a beloved film, but their flagship film, the film that put them on the map, and give it the modern treatment, likely once again stripping it of what made it so magical to begin with. Of course, some of you might feel that I am making this video somewhat prematurely, given that the film hasn't even been released, and I am putting together an opinion based purely on what Rachel Zegler has said in interviews and these trailers and whatnot, but I think that Disney has demonstrated that it doesn't care about its original source material, and it's going to continue creating remakes that don't stand up to the originals in any way, shape, or form. So of course, I fully understand and reconcile that I can't pass judgment on this film until I have seen it, but in a way, I don't feel like I really have to know that it's going to end up in a place that most of us don't like. Disney has already shown us time and time again what it intends to do. And in the end, I am once again incredibly disappointed with the way that this film is likely going to turn out, and I'm even more disappointed knowing that Disney is tarnishing its own legacy. Now on that note, and before I open the floor to all of you, this is just a reminder to check out Raycon using the link in the description. When you use my link, you will get 15% off site-wide. That's 15% off everything on the website, so go check them out, and big thanks to Raycon for supporting the channel. Now open the floor to all of you. What do you all think? Are you somebody who believes that this remake is not going to be very good because Disney's already told us that it's not going to be good? Do you think that we should give it a chance and we're we're all kind of passing judgment way too soon. What do you make of the horrible CGI of the dwarves, or Rachel Ziegler's comments about everything relating to this film? Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Are you going to see it? Are you excited to see it? And what do you generally make of this issue overall? As always, if you have made it this far in the video, congratulations. I always like having you along for the full ride. If you are new here and you are not subscribed already and you would like to see more of me and more of this kind of content, feel free to like this video as well as subscribing to the channel and leaving me a comment, because I do read the majority of them. If you have any video suggestions, feel free to leave me them in the comments as well. And in the meantime, I hope you wonderful, pretty people stay safe and well, and I will see you in the next video.